A formal introduction of the event, but we'll start with the recitation of the Holy Quran.
Bismillahirrahmanirrahim. अल्लाह के नाम से शुरू जो निहायत मेहरबान हमेशा रहम फरमाने वाला है। कुल हुवल्लाहु अहद। ए नबी मुकर्रम आप फरमा दीजिए वो अल्लाह है जो यकता है। अल्लाहु समद। अल्लाह सबसे बेनियाज, सबकी पनाह और सब पर फायक है। लम यलिद वलम यूलद। न उससे कोई पैदा हुआ है और ना ही वो पैदा किया गया है। वलम यकुन लहू कुफुवन अहद। और ना ही उसका कोई हमसर है।
We can now start the event. As I mentioned, we've organized this seminar with the cooperation of Overseas Employment Corporation, Ministry of Overseas Pakistani Human Resource Centre, and the Department of Sociology, Quaid-i-Azam University Islamabad. This event will address the reality that migrants are amongst those groups of people, those social groups, who are the hardest hit because of the corona pandemic. They have been heavily impacted, not only socially, but also financially, and the economic and the social consequences of this crisis has been so disproportionate that it's difficult for them to manage. This is what we will be talking about today. The event will also look into government responses, how they're coping with their strategies to address the challenges faced by these migrants who are now forced to return to their home country. This is not a standalone event. It's a series of events that we will be organizing during the course of next year. This is the first event in that series. And we will be jointly organizing it with the Overseas Employment Corporation. We have engaged and will also be engaging in future key speakers from academia and the government to present their research and their initiatives. This webinar is being telecast live and will be broadcast to social media followers, both through the Facebook pages of Migrant Resource Centre as well as OEC. Having said that, I won't come in between you and the speakers. So let me invite Dr. Muhammad Ishtaq Ali. He's Director Academia at Quaid-i-Azam University and has a background in microbiology. He did his postdoctorate studies from University of New South Wales, Sydney, and also has a PhD from Quaid-i-Azam University. He's a distinguished scholar and has numerous publications and research papers to his name. I invite now Muhammad Ishtaq Ali to share his thoughts. Press. Dr. Ishtaq.
Assalamu alaikum. I hope I'm audible. Right. So, first of all, I like to welcome all the, August, speakers who are going to speak on this very important topic, that is impact of COVID on the migrants. And I also like to appreciate, the organizers. They've done a great job, considering the COVID pandemic. Having such virtual session is always, useful thing. You see, COVID, where it affected economies, where it affected lives, where it affected every aspect of life, it has a direct impact on migrants. Either they are legal or, they are taking asylums and some other ways. If we just talk about Pakistan, by having said that Pakistan is about 230 million population, and our economy, its dependence is a lot of, almost 8 to 9% depends upon the remittances that is coming from the migrants, legal migrants who are going, overseas for employment opportunities. But this pandemic has really very affected the economy. It closed the borders, it affected the flight schedules, and it affected, it brought a lot of challenges and issues to the, particularly the legal migrants, because, there are a lot of countries who ban their travels, who stop their work visas. So you see, this cover have brought, serious issues to the lives and, of course, employment opportunities for the legal migrants. And having said, I hope today's, distinguished scholars, they will present their narrative about that. But if we just look around, it's, what aspect of migrants, either they are legal or illegal, how the governments are, affecting by them. Though we have at Pakistan, we have a OEC that's doing a great job. They have a policy. They are regulating. They are basically awareing people, to opt for the legal ways for the employment and opportunities to move across the world. But of course, there are still a number of illegal migrants who are crossing borders and risking their lives. So I hope today's session, talks will bring something really good for brainstorming and for policy workers. And I hope the conclusion or recommendation of today's seminar will be something, way forward for our government, our, different sectors. I like to appreciate the role of MRC, the Migrant Resource Centre, the way, they are highlighting and awareing on this very important aspect. And I also appreciate the, contribution and the role of, OEC, and of course, my sociology department, Dr. Sarfraz and his team. So we basically, at the end, where I like to acknowledge and appreciate everybody's, I hope they, all the audience and particularly the speakers, they will definitely, talk on some very important issues that are going to bring something good, not only for the countries, but of course for the life and for the, welfare of migrants. And we will be in position that we will set some, recommendations at the end of the conference. So on behalf of Quaid-i-Azam University, I welcome you all. I wish you a very productive and healthy session. And I wish that there should be some concrete recommendations be at the outcome of that. At the last, again, I appreciate the role of MRC, OEC, and of course, Department of Sociology, Quaid-i-Azam University. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Dr. Ishtaq, for your kind remarks. Before we move any forward, I would like to share with you that the team that will be moderating this session is myself, Zulkarnain Rafiq. I'm the Migrant Resource Centre coordinator at Islamabad. With me, I have Omar Wazir, who's the MRC counselor, and he's a trusted and very good member of my team. We'll be moderating the sessions. And as we move along, this is for the attendees, that your microphones, those who have registered as attendees, your microphones will be muted and they will remain muted throughout the session. The panelists will be invited one by one. First, the DG, Bureau of Immigration and Overseas Employment, and the OEC, and then the two speakers from Quaid-i-Azam University. And then we'll have an MRC presentation, and then we'll have the closing remarks. The panelists, speakers will be open as they speak, as they make their presentations, and then they will be muted. And then can be open when they want to speak later. Now we have to proceed with the event further. I am honored that Managing Director of Overseas Employment Corporation, Mr. Kashif Ahmed Noor, is with us. He's also Director General of the Bureau of Immigration and Overseas Employment in Islamabad. He has a background in management and accounting, and he advises the federal government on immigration policies and procedures. He also is responsible for the overall control and administration of the Bureau. He looks after the operation and administration of the policies in relation to overseas employment promotion. He has vast experience and a diversified portfolio and a very distinguished professional who has lots of experience in public and private sector. Mr. Kashif Ahmed Noor is with us. I would like to now invite him to please give his opening remarks. Kashif Ahmed Noor, sir.
Thank you, Zulkarnain. I warmly welcome everybody. I'm thankful to ICMPD and Quaid-i-Azam University for arranging this webinar. We've been working a lot with ICMPD for the last so many years, and we are glad that now we'll be formalizing this arrangement and working in a much better way. It's about time that we discuss the impacts of COVID, because COVID has had a lot of bearing on the countries around the world, and especially when it comes to migrant workers. Safe and legal migration has a very important component when it comes to return and reintegration. I'll share with you a brief presentation that we have. Labor migration is very important when it comes to remittances, elevation of unemployment, elevation of poverty, both for the migrant workers and for the countries which are involved in labor migration. The migrant workers play a key role in the economy of the country. Just for some statistics, over 900,000 people were biometrically registered. We launched the biometric registration in October 18. From October 18 till November 19, they were biometrically registered. And we started collecting data of the returnee workers as well. About 79,000 people returned out of these biometrically verified people who went abroad, and of which almost 40,000 returned during the period January to March. COVID-19 has affected labor migration, and we expect a potential job loss of 200,000 migrant workers. And it is expected to increase if the lockdowns and the situation doesn't improve in the destination countries. Again, some statistics, 60,000 people couldn't travel due to the travel ban. And the people who have come back, we have launched an app as well as a website where we are registering them. About 50,000 people who have registered, they have claimed that they have lost their jobs. And then there are about 26,000 people who are on paid, unpaid leaves. There's an element of Azad visa when it comes to Saudi Arabia. That is not included in the leave paid, unpaid, because most of those guys are on open contract. So we term them as layoffs. The other potential loss that we had was that there were 102,000 jobs in our system as of 15th of March, on which the recruitment was put on hold. These were some of the jobs and the countries where people were registered and they couldn't travel, or the jobs which were in pipeline. Again, you can see that it's mainly GCC, because focus of Pakistanis mostly is towards GCC. The trades against which people were registered and couldn't travel, as well as the trades against which the jobs were available and the people couldn't be registered or selected, mainly labor and drivers and general workers, three main categories, which is mostly our preferred categories when it comes to the GCC countries. This is the main thing which I want to focus on. Government of Pakistan on The first week of June, we launched this after giving presentations to the BAME office, to the ministry, and to other stakeholders. It was a four-pronged strategy which was launched. The first phase, the return phase, wherein we were supposed to get back all the stranded Pakistanis in different countries. I'll share the details which the people who came back wailing this return phase. Main actors were the Pakistan missions abroad, the PIA or the foreign airlines, FIA for the immigration purposes, and the district administration which arranged the quarantine facility. This phase was completed on 20th of June and more than 100,000 people came in, which of course included migrant workers, which included people on visit visa, people on tabligh, Zaireen, people who had gone for Umrah, students, all of them. Second phase, which was immediately launched, was the reintegration phase, wherein my organization, Bureau of Immigration, was supposed to analyze the data and refer them to different organizations. OEC was entrusted with the task of building a profile for the returnees so that once the jobs open up abroad, those job seekers can become potential migrant workers. We have started sharing this data, and I'm pleased to report that quite a few people have been selected for jobs abroad again, and they have started departing. NAFTTC has the mandate of skill certification and skill upgradation, so the data was shared with them. If somebody is interested in getting the skills certified or skills upgraded during the pandemic, they can seek help from NAFTTC and the TEFTAS. SAMIDA, Small and Medium Enterprise Development Authority, will share the data to provide loans or facilitation for the returnee migrant workers if they want to become small-scale entrepreneurs. There's an important aspect of claims. Our special assistant to the Prime Minister had a very active diplomatic engagement with all the countries in GCC especially, and at the highest level, at the labor ministers, the interior minister level. Because of that, fortunately, we didn't get much claims. Most of our workers who came back, they were paid their dues. Before departing, they were given the assistance in departures where applicable. So we didn't get many claims. OPF was supposed to provide financial assistance in those cases where it was needed. OPF played its part. My organization, Bureau of Immigration, is dealing with the complaints in case there is some issue with the overseas employment promoter or some death and disability claim. We are dealing with it. Final phase is the social inclusion on which we are working now. We've shared this data with NYDF, National Youth Development Framework, and we are trying to have some sort of an arrangement for the returnees if they want to have loans through the Hunarmand Pakistan and the Kamyab Jawan scheme launched by the Prime Minister of Pakistan. We've shared the data with them, and now we are trying to have some sort of, you can say, reserved block for the returnee migrant workers. Say 10% or 20% of the total allocation that should be reserved for the returnee migrant workers to help them in better social inclusion back home. We convinced BISP because my migrant worker is excluded from the SARS program because of three technical reasons. One, he has foreign travel history. Of course, he goes abroad for work, so he has foreign travel history. Two, he has a smart CNIC or NICOP. And three, in most cases, they get their passports made from the executive passport offices because of paucity of time. We have managed to convince them that instead of looking on the technicalities, they should judge each migrant worker based on his or her PSER card. If he falls below a particular benchmark that BISP has fixed, then he may be included in the cash assistance program or a school fee program for his children, and the technicalities should be exempted. I'm pretty positive that we'll be able to get this approved from the federal cabinet pretty soon, because these conditions have been fixed by the federal cabinet, and then those workers can be included. As far as numbers, we have done some survey based on this 900,000 odd people, and we are, the range probably would be 25 to 35% workers might fall in that particular band of PACR scorecard. Another thing which we are actively working on with another sister organization is the informal registry, and for having some sort of a pension scheme for these migrant workers. During their stay abroad or when they come back home, they can have some sort of a decent pension or a one-time grant. They can buy their pension just like the contributory pension scheme works. We're working on that, but that involves some legislation, because EOBI is only geared up for industries in Pakistan. So we are working with EOBI to have that particular piece of legislation so that it can cover the migrant workers as well. This is again the flow chart of the activities, all the stakeholders. I would like to emphasize on the bottom box, wherein collaboration assistance from international organizations like ILO, GIZ, World Bank, IOM, and ICMPD. What we have suggested to the federal government was that all these organizations are actively engaged, and we acknowledge their role. And all we wanted was that they should give some sort of allocation for these returning migrant workers. I'm happy to share that most of the organizations are not only very well recipient of the idea, they have conveyed to us that they are willing to work on this. And we are in active talks with most of them so that we can have some sort of scheme placed for the returning migrant workers, not only who are affected from COVID, but in future, those returning migrant workers that will come back, they should be able to benefit and socially reintegrate within the economic system of the country. These are the duties of different organizations like Ministry of Overseas Pakistanis, Missions Abroad, FIA, Bureau of Immigration, OPF, what was expected of them and what they've been doing as well. Overseas Employment Corporation. Then there's Overseas Employment Promoters Association, NAFTTC, Benazir Income Support Program, NYDF, SMETA, State Bank. I would emphasize that we've been actively engaged with State Bank for the last more than 2 years now. And the Russian digital accounts is one of the outcomes of that engagement. We're working with the State Bank to get more incentives for migrant workers in the form of some sort of a loyalty program against the remittances that they send. I'm eagerly looking forward to Dr. Ayaz Qureshi's discourse today. I'm sure that he will share a lot more with us, and it will help us in future interactions with not only with the State Bank, but with other stakeholders as well. As I have already underscored, that we are looking for additional targeted assistance to relevant departments for the poverty alleviation, for entrepreneurship, and for reintegration of the returnees. Not only of these returnees coming back home due to COVID, but also of returnees who will keep coming back because migration is an ongoing process. It'll keep on happening. Just a bit of a touch on why we developed this portal. The data was coming from us, from the missions, had quite a few important omissions. One, they were more concerned about sending Pakistanis who were stranded back home. So in most cases, some CNIC number was not there because for them, the most important piece of documents was the passport. And then the mission was not concerned about the education, the trade, the skills, and the most important key, the local cell phone contact in Pakistan. So that is what prompted us to work on the launch of this portal and the app, and was launched on 9th of June. This was the form which was shared with all the returnees. And since until 18th of December, we've got almost 77,000 people registered on it. We're capturing data in 18 fields and sharing with all the relevant stakeholders that we have. We are in the process of developing a connection with FPCCI and for the foreign employers, so that if they want to search data of these returnees, they can be facilitated to search the data. And then we have developed a system wherein a short message goes to a particular lady or gentleman about a possible job, both in Pakistan as well as abroad. These are the categories who were registered, as I've already explained, and couldn't travel, the jobs that were available and couldn't be utilized. The countries, the backup of that pie chart, which I explained in the start of my discourse. Thank you. I'm looking forward very eagerly, as I already submitted to Dr. Ayaz Qureshi, because I'm sure that Edinburgh University and working over there would give us a lot more insight into the remittances and their linkage to the socio-economic development, as well as to see what other countries are doing in this regard. The other thing I'm looking forward to is Dr. Sarfraz Khan. Again, reintegration is very important aspect when it comes to migration. And I'm sure that Dr. Sabmat have done a lot of research on it. And we can always extrapolate the studies in Gujarat towards other parts of the country. And last but not the least, the advocacy and awareness of our colleagues at MRC. We've been helping them, we've been coordinating with them. They've been providing a very valuable input to us. That was also help us in going forward. And I would like to thank ICMPD again, and looking forward to many more interactions with ICMPD and with other colleagues at other academia, because I personally believe that academia has to provide us that necessary impetus. The research that you do is very valuable for us to make policies, to advise, and to put in some schemes which are beneficial for the migrant workers. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Kashif and Anusab, for your very insightful comments on return and reintegration. You mentioned about claims and social reintegration and engagement with organizations, which led to Roshan Digital Account, and I'm sure the loyalty program will also come along soon. Particularly interesting were the mentions regarding poverty alleviation and entrepreneurship for returning migrants. And you've been a very valuable support and very, a person and a contact and a partner who has been there for us all the time, and we value that support and we are thankful to you. Thank you very much for your comments. Now we will be moving along with the next session of this event. We have two presentations from Quaid-i-Azam University speakers on reintegration and remittances. I will ask and request my colleague, Mr. Umar Wazir, to take over and moderate the sessions and invite the speakers.
Thank you, Zulkarnain. Hello and Assalamu alaikum, everyone. My name is Umar Wazir, and I'm also representing the Migrant Resource Centre Islamabad office, where I'm working as a counselor. I'm very delighted to be a part of today's webinar and especially to moderate the next session. Talking of which, for the next session we have with us is Dr. Sarfraz Khan, who is currently working as Assistant Professor in the Department of Sociology, at Quaid-i-Azam University Islamabad. He PhD from Quaid-i-Azam University. PhD title was The Impact of Migration on Education and Health. He has done extensive ethnographic fieldwork in Pakistan while exploring the various aspects of international migration, including remittances, repatriation, irregular migration, migration and religious and likewise issues. Today, he will be talking about reintegration of Pakistani migrants in the times of COVID-19, the case of District Gujarat. He will also be addressing how the recent pandemic has affected the people from all walks of life, including the migrants. Pakistan stands among the leading migrant sending countries and receives approximately over 23 billion annually as remittances. In recent times of COVID-19, the migrants had to fall back from the Middle East and some of the European countries, citing the magnitude of the spread of pandemic there. The pandemic had not only affected the movement of people, but at the same time shrunk the earning opportunities. Key focus of the discussion will be what were the effects of the COVID-19 on the lives of the migrants and what motivated them to reintegrate. Also, he will be sharing how the pandemic has affected the earning opportunities for the migrants, what were the possible effects of pandemic on the socio-economic life matters of the migrant-dependent household. Before I hand it over to Dr. Sarfraz, just to let everyone know, the time allocated for this session would be 20 minutes. So Dr. Sarfraz, I would like to request you to please go ahead.
Thank you very much, Umar. So thank you, everyone. It's wonderful to have such learned individuals working together for the welfare of the migrants. Since Pakistan comes under such, you can say, in the region, it's very important kind of country where the people are always on the move. Many of them, they move through the legal channels, but there are certain other individuals who have to go through the other ways, we can say them the illegal channels. We had very wonderful, brief, you can say, a situation analysis by Kashif Ahmed Noorsa, DG Bureau of Immigration. He has presented a case that how that pandemic has affected the individuals, those who were either aiming to go abroad or those who were returning back to home. So keeping in view that situation, I will be, you can say, going brief through that, my presentation. Is a kind of issue when the individuals, those who are working abroad, either they are contractees, either they are, you can say, having the permanent job over there, the migrant workers living abroad. As mentioned earlier by Kashif Saab, that many of the Pakistanis, they are actually moving into GCCs, you can say the Middle East region. There are the situations for the workers are not favorable for our time. When there is a crisis like the pandemic crisis, they had to get back to Pakistan because many of them, they go for the seasonal jobs or the jobs which have such contractual nature. So they had to suffer, not only those individuals, those who move into those regions for earning to support their families, but at the same time, when they get back, they return and they try to reintegrate, they had to face many problems since they are being stigmatized by their own family, by the relatives, by the society at large, because they were the earning hands for that family previously. But when they don't have, you can say, earnings, then they had to suffer at many folds. So giving the background, Gujarat is one of the famous districts when it comes to the international migration, not only for the legal ways, but also for the irregular ways, because many of the Gujaratis, they aim to move abroad annually. They are always preparing themselves to move abroad to, you can say, achieve those standards, they feel that they could not be achieved through other means while living over here. So the population is slightly under 3 million, uh, while there are about 0.35 million registered, you can say, migrant workers. And I hope there are so many other, you can say, those who are living abroad, because you can find Gujaratis in most of the European regions because they have already established the social network, familial kinship networks, and they utilize those familial social kin networks, you can say, maximally to reach over there. There are many agents working in such regions. We say them the migrant handlers, are the migrant smugglers, those who channelize such individuals who are always opting to move abroad. But citing the pandemic magnitude, many of those individuals who either they were moving abroad through the legal ways or irregular way, they had to, you can say, suffer. And the statistics have already shared by the, you can say, DGSAF, that there were about, you can say, 90,000 individuals, those who were aiming to move abroad for the, you can say, legal jobs, but they had to wait for the longer time period because of that pandemic. Gujaratis are very famous in European region, since you find them, they are very hardworking, but they are very skillful at the same time. They find their ways while moving abroad, and you can say creating opportunities for other, and making those other individuals to, you can say, reach at their destination, and creating such an opportunities for them to work there. Since the spread of COVID-19 in Pakistan, the March, I think that was mid of March, when we formally announced that we have you can see, the pandemic situation has created many problems for those who were people on the move, those who were wanted to move abroad, or those individuals who were living abroad. They wanted to get back because of the notion that they wanted to live with their family, or they were there to face certain problems. So these are kind of some of the news clips, or the, you can say, media reports that mentioned about the return of the migrants. So many of the data is based on the FIA statistics, but there are certain other, you can say, informations which are shared by the newspapers like BBC report and the Dawn report. About over 2,000 migrants, they returned to Gujarat during April, by, you can say, 5th April. And many of these migrants were traced by the government because they wanted them to test whether they were the carrier of the COVID-19 or not. But unfortunately, there were a few of such migrants, those who actually don't want them to be checked by the state whether they were, you can say, having the COVID. But that unfortunately had happened, that spread of COVID was there. And many of the individuals, those who were returning into Pakistan, they didn't test themselves, but what happened to them, they suffered themselves. At the same time, they had, you can say, they spreaded that coronavirus to the other families and the members of their, you can say, close circle. At the same time, as mentioned by the DGSAF, that there were many streams of the returnees. Many of them, they went abroad for the, you can say, pilgrimage into, you can say, Saudi Arabia. Many of them went to Iran. So these were the two major, you can say, regions from where the people returned back. And the other region was GCC, as mentioned earlier. And the European region, people, when they get back, they were one of the, you can say, carrier who actually spreaded virus. And one of the examples are mentioned over here about Muhammad Hafiz. He came back in the second week of March from Spain, but no one checked him. He was one of the carriers, and later on he spreaded that to the other individuals who were, you can say, they were in contact with that individual. So this is all about that, how that situation emerged over in Gujarat, because initially people were not, you can say, believing into this virus. They were saying this is a kind of conspiracy, and it might be a kind of a conspiracy against the Muslim Ummah. And many of them, they were believing that we may not be suffered because we have a good faith, and that look at the cases which spreaded in the case of Gujarat, there were so many cases, and they had kind of effects on the others, those who were living there to them. So the pandemic has definitely induced the return because many of the individuals, those who were living in the Middle East and the European region, they had to fall back. They came back to Pakistan, and number was in thousands. Many of we can see that the news were there that the Pakistani workers, the migrant workers in the GCC, they registered with the different embassies and missions of Pakistan because they want to repatriate into Pakistan because the situation was very difficult for them. Industries were closing, there were no jobs for them. That's why they wanted to get back. And many of them were living at the, you can say, a very difficult situation because they don't have the money for them. They were unable to purchase the tickets. In many regions, the fare of the tickets, they went up. So it was very difficult for them. The economic crisis that led to the shrink of jobs, the opportunities, there were lesser opportunities for them, for the migrant workers. And many of them, they wanted to, you can say, come back to Pakistan to spend time with them, with their families. But some of the individuals were also kind of having the perspective that life is going to end and we need to relocate ourselves with our family. If we are going to die, we need to die with our families. So that's why they had to come back. But majority of them, they were coming back because of the situation, the crisis situation that was happening in the, you can say, destination regions. While coming back, many of them, they became the victim of that virus, while some of them, they became victim while teaching over here because at the destination countries, they were following strict SOPs, but when they came back into Pakistan, no one was bothering initially to, you can say, follow those SOPs, which were set by the state for them, for the safety of the public. Economic crisis affected migrant dependents at origin. Definitely, the economic crisis at the destination countries, the migrants were working there. They were earning, you can say, resources, and they were sending those resources, as mentioned by in the brief introduction, that we are lucky to have about 7 to 8% of the GDP is coming from the remittance, about 23 billion US dollars, which recently we received in the last year. So the migrant dependents, they had to suffer at large, because these were the only income opportunities for their families. Those are coming through the remittances are being, you can say, fulfilled through the remittance. So there are the other issues that they don't have the reserves. Many of the families, they were depending on those, you can say, inflow of remittance that being sent by the migrant members. Since migrant members were not active working, they had to, you can say, suffer. Difficult to cope with the pandemic situation since that health situation was emerging. So if there was a case of the, you can say, coronavirus in the family, then they had to, you can say, look after the other things that they might be taking loans from the other individuals or the families, but in such cases, families were normally not in support to those individuals. The financial support was very difficult. When it comes to reintegration of those returnees, the migrants, those who are working abroad, normally many of the researchers, those who have addressed this issue at large, in the case of Pakistan or the other developing countries, there are certain issues those could be faced by the return migrants in terms of their reintegration to the, you can say, society at origin. With the, you can say, system, they left that system and they went abroad. Financial crisis was definitely there. There were no clear future plans made by their families and those individuals who are coming back into Pakistan, as mentioned by the Kashif Saab about the different institutions' role in, you can say, building the capacity of these return individuals, are providing soft loans for those individuals, are, you can say, providing a platform for them to re-establish themselves or to make a support for their family. But there are certain difficulties for those individuals who are at resettling in the region society, because we normally stigmatize those individuals. We don't accept them because they are economically inactive. They are, once they were, you can say, supporting them, their family, the very family, now they are depending on that family, and their social network is not very much active at the origin, since they had left that society or the community for a longer time period. When they return back, there are certain kind of trust deficits for them, and they were no having such kind of alternate activities, because they're not aware about that situation, that how people are living, what they are doing, how to interact with them, how to make, you can say, economic, you can say, contracts with those individuals. So reintegration, social and economic aspects of reintegration, majority of the return migrants, they had to face many problems because of the situation which has changed over the time period, or the trust deficit they might face because of they were not considered as the member of that community, or the individuals they depend on the other. We can say that the death stigma was also annexed with the you can say the people who had the COVID or the coronavirus. So many of the individuals, they normally hide the deaths if the relative of them were dead, because of the case I mentioned over here, Abdul Hafiz, about the Khaja Abdul Hafiz. His elder son actually lives in the Germany, and he is very much famous because of his medicine business. He had a good link, and he was one of the, you can say, contractor of the medicine, who provides medicine to the Aziz Bhatti Hospital, which is one of the good hospitals, public sector hospital in Gujarat. But even then, his family was not a kind of having trust in that facility which is being created as hospital. They had many, you can say, mistrust about the doctors and the staff and the facilities available over there. So they shifted, the family shifted him to Lahore, but no one agreed to take him for that. So the migrants, they poured money for that. They tried to, you can say, get him out of that crisis, but even then he was expired while he was on his way from Lahore to Gujarat. There were many challenges for the health department. They were having the lesser basic health facilities, and they were not prepared for that pandemic crisis. So they had to wait for the many days for the trusted, you can say, results of those samples. They actually sent to Lahore initially, because at that time period, there were no such laboratories, those who could actually give the instant results. So they had the shortage of health, and even then the protective kits, they don't have those protective kits initially, but when they get those, and they turned the University of Gujarat as a quarantine center, so things changed substantially. But then the people were not agreed to get enrolled into those kind of quarantine centers, because there was a mistrust. They were saying that they might inject you with a kind of poison and you will die. So there was a crisis situation emerging, not only with the returnees, but also with the dependents of the returnees. They were not following SOPs, and they were not believing into that health system which was there to support them in time of crisis. So sometimes that was very difficult for the law enforcement agencies to trace those return migrants. As mentioned by Dijsa, that data collection is very difficult when it comes to Pakistan. We don't have such kind of systems which normally get people instantly registered, and because they don't have the local numbers over here. And the police actually tried their best to engage the community, the local community, they went to the mosque and made announcements. But even then, there were many individuals who didn't, you can say, showed up, and they were not tested for that. So they had to face many, you can say, problems processing of those returned migrants. Suggestions about the reintegration policies need to be refixed, and we need to reestablish those policies, keeping in view the current situation or the crisis the migrants had faced. And many of the, you can say, policies mentioned by the DGSA, but there is a need to, you can say, take some swift actions, because when we look at the, you can say, the policies, it takes time. The benefits are not, you can say, provided swiftly. So individuals are facing problems, and the families are in crisis. We need to look forward into such policies which can give them initial support for their livelihoods. And there is a need to, you can say, develop such kind of sustained support for them, because they are returned back. No, they are reintegrating, but the social and economic circumstances are not good. They are not supportive for them. Small loan schemes are mentioned by the colleague, that those are very necessary when it comes to the reintegration. So there are community ownership and the family ownership issues. Many of the families, for them, the migrant workers are, you can say, checks. They are money for them. They send money. They give, you can say, they get them out of that crisis. Whenever they are in crisis, they support. But those very migrants, when they came back because of that crisis situation, the families were not owning them. They were not supporting them. They were not, rather they were taking them as a burden. So that's all from my side. We can have questions after that. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Dr. Sarfaraz, for sharing such important information with all of us. It is indeed very important to address the issues that migrants and especially overseas Pakistanis are facing during the times of COVID-19, as overseas Pakistanis are an asset to Pakistan. Here, I just want to update all the participants that we will have a separate question and answer session after the presentation by the next presenter. Moving on to the next topic, we have with us is Dr. Ayaz Qureshi, who is currently working as a lecturer in medical anthropology at Edinburgh University, UK. He has carried out ethnographic fieldwork on HIV/AIDS control in Pakistan. He received his PhD in social anthropology from SOAS, UK. He has been part of a number of research projects in the area of infectious diseases, reproductive and sexual health, and status of women in Pakistan. Today, Dr. Ayaz Qureshi will be presenting a presentation on remittances and socio-economic development, which he will also be highlighting development policy and practices how development policies and practices have tended to see mobility and negative terms in the past. But in recent years, this perception has started to change. In his presentation, he will analyze this shift and look at the variety of ways in which migration and development intersects. Key questions for this discussion would include: are migrants, development agencies, and governments talking about the same things when they talk about development? What are the advantages and challenges of remittances for development? What possibilities and problems surround returnee migrants? Now, without wasting any time, as we are running out of time, I would like to request Dr. Ayaz to start the third session. Dr. Ayaz, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Umair. I hope you can hear me. Okay.
Yes, we can.
Yeah, thank you for the introduction. I would also like to add that we have recently started a Health and Migration Research Network at University of Edinburgh. So any of you who are interested in linking up with academia in the UK on issues of health and migration are very welcome to join that network. And you can find the link on my university web profile. So I'll try to keep myself to the given 20 minutes. I would like to talk primarily about the relationship between migration and development. This relationship has been viewed both positively and negatively. The positive view is that migration is good for development, and the negative view is that migration undermines development. There are also debates on whether development causes migration or lack of development causes migration. The answers to these questions are not straightforward. It depends on many factors, such as whether we are talking about regular or irregular migration. For example, refugees and irregular migrants may be excluded from labor markets, and relevant measures of migration's relationship to or impact on development. Then there are differences between second and third generation immigrants versus recent arrivals in terms of how they might be related to socio-economic development back home. There are also questions like who moves and for what reasons. The poor or those who do not have means to migrate can often remain stuck in places where they come from, despite wanting to move on further. Moreover, there is control of mobility across political borders, which is often not absolute. So all these factors are relevant and should be taken into account when we think about the relationship between migration and development. An important lesson from social scientific literature is that many of the current structures of the nexus between migration and development have their roots in colonial control and regulation of mobility. For example, when migrant laborers were needed for development of port cities and modern towns in colonial territories, the authorities discouraged migration of entire families from rural areas to urban centers. Thus, the modernity of cities combined the fear of contamination from the indigenous cultures if entire families moved to cities, thus bringing their tribal customs. And you can find parallels to those patterns in current age migration as well. Why is it that only men are encouraged to migrate and on their own also, not their entire families? And even when they're migrant laborers for decades in the host countries, they're often not given the kind of cultural citizenship that they should deserve after contributing to the economies and societies of those countries. So there are many parallels with the colonial structures of power and regulation of mobility in our current. Therefore, out-migration of young people, especially young men from these rural areas to mining towns, was encouraged, sometimes enforced, whereas their families were kept in their place in rural areas. There were, of course, other patterns of migration too. For example, I can quote large-scale migration of entire villages and communities in British India around the turn of the century to set up canal colonies in the newly irrigated lands of Punjab. So migration and development went hand in hand during the colonial period, and the control of population mobility was a key to the development of in that era. In post-colonial times, many developmental states continued the policy of fixing people in their places rather than mobilizing them. Migration, especially rural to urban migration, was seen as a problem for the developmental states. Out-of-country migration was seen as a process of brain drain, hence inimical to local development. However, this thinking gave way to positive view of the relation between migration and development when remittances from abroad became a major source of earning in the face of economic difficulties induced by structural adjustment programs of the World Bank and IMF. So migration came to be seen as a good thing, and migrants came to be seen as agents of development, sending much needed remittances back home to the economies that were struggling. Migration was now seen as a kind of win-win situation, which contributed to national development through remittances and skill acquisition by migrants. So here are some facts, some statistics, which I have on remittances, which I'm sure many of you are already familiar with. So what I have here is actually 5 years old. In 2015, according to World Bank's Migration and Remittances Fact Book, worldwide remittances flow exceeded 601 billion, as more than 447 million people were living outside their countries of birth. Developing countries received about $441 billion in remittances, which is nearly 3 times the amount of official development assistance these countries were receiving, which is an eye-opener for anyone who works on development. So does this mean that remittances are the key to development, especially because they exceed official development assistance to poorer countries? Will remittances save the day for the poor countries and lift them out of poverty and underdevelopment? Some people believe in this kind of optimism. Others call it remittance euphoria and draw attention to the fact that migration as well as remittances is not a new phenomenon. We do not live in an age of unprecedented migration. The cause of migration is not always underdevelopment of the sending areas. Migratory flows cannot be stemmed by development assistance or trade liberalization, and that people migrate for a variety of reasons, not just for their underdevelopment or for economic gains. Countering remittance euphoria in this way does not mean that remittances do not contribute to the development of home countries. It is also a myth that the money sent back by migrants is spent mainly on conspicuous consumption and non-reproductive investments. However, the impact of remittances on socio-economic development can be improved by measures such as transaction costs of remittances should be reduced, and then exempting them from taxation and supporting self-help organizations and community associations of migrants and so on. It was really heartening to hear Mr. Kashif Noor talking about all the policy measures that they are taking to facilitate migration and the flow of remittances. And also the point that Dr. Sarfraz made that in times of crisis like COVID-19, we need swift action in addition to the policies that the Bureau is putting in place. So this is drawing attention to improving the effectiveness of remittances for achieving goals of development. And that can be done by facilitating migrant self-help groups and organizations, and also exempting remittances from taxation, as well as reducing transaction costs for people who are sending money back home. Another important insight from social sciences is that remittances are more than just about money. They are the means by which migrants living away from their families actively fulfill their social obligations and play a meaningful role in their communities despite the physical distance that separates them. Thus, it is not just an economic phenomenon, a cash flow that is vital for economic growth and development, but also a social phenomenon that contributes to holistic well-being of the individuals. Development as broadly defined, more than economic growth, also including well-being of individuals and their families. So remittances are about negotiating gender roles, about community, about ideas of success and failure as a person, a matter of pride, and about exclusion and inclusion in family and broader social networks. The money sent back home provides a lifeline in times of crisis, such as the current pandemic. It is a lifeline not only because it literally sustains life in the face of hunger, disease, and poverty, but also because it helps to bind together those living abroad in times of uncertainty back home. So when we think development in relation to migration, we should think about it beyond the increasing share of remittances in national GDPs and include well-being of migrant families and their own well-being in diasporic communities. We may celebrate the sustained flow of remittances or even an increase in the numbers despite COVID-19 pandemic, but we must not forget the plight of migrant workers in labor markets in Middle East. I have, for instance, seen many video clips on internet, on Facebook groups set up by these migrants, pleading for help from the Pakistani government and embassies in Middle East, people who are stuck in the host countries because they had lost their jobs, they could not have their visas, exit visas, could not come back, didn't have money to pay for the flights. So we need to pay attention to that also, in addition to counting monies that come to the country in the form of remittances as a contribution to development. So when we think development, we must think about the well-being of migrants. So while acknowledging the important role of remittances in socio-economic development, however broadly we define it, we must also be mindful of the fact that remittances do not reach everyone in the same way. It is only a minority who receive them, and there's usually a lack of control by the senders on how the money is spent at home. Moreover, heavy financial costs, social pressures, and dangers involved in transactions are often ignored in celebratory accounts of remittances. At the national level, remittances euphoria can lead to a possible decrease in official development aid, and sometimes gross miscalculations at the highest levels of development policy. I do not want to mention schemes of building large dams with donations from expatriates, although I have just done that. But that is a kind of miscalculation that people can have at the highest levels because they're riding on the wave of remittances euphoria, to say the least. So I would like to conclude by saying that migration seems to have mutated from being framed as a problem for economic development to becoming a solution. Ideas like temporary labor migration, highly skilled migration, social remittances, and brain gain instead of brain drain have got currency in a kind of migration euphoria that we are witnessing in the development discourse today. However, evidence suggests that though human mobility can be a driver for economic development, labor migration under structures of global inequality often fails to create long-term benefits for sending communities. And remittances are important. They contribute large sums of money to national economies, but they cannot be a substitute for sustainable local development. In other words, in principle, migration can produce good development outcomes, but migration alone cannot remove structural constraints to economic growth and greater democracy, if that is what we mean by socio-economic development. And I'll end there, and I'll be very thankful for any further discussion on these points. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Riaz Qureshi, for sharing such detailed information on remittances and socio-economic. And it is a very important topic. And as you said that, yes, the remittances, they are playing a vital role in development of, or development in the developing economies, and also the importance of remittances in the country's GDP. Now, I know that many of the participants will have several questions for our panelists. So we move forward to the combined Q&A session for all the three sessions we had today. I will request all the participants to share their questions in the Q&A section. While sharing your questions, please do write your name, organization name, and your email address along with the questions. So the floor is open for questions that our participants have.
While we are waiting for some questions to come in, I would be very interested to know or to hear maybe from Mr. Noor on the presentation from Mr. Qureshi in terms of remittances and policies to support this. I think in your presentation, you've already presented a lot of the frameworks that the government has put in place in order to facilitate the remittances and development aspect of that. And I felt like there was a very close link between both the scientific research as well as what the government is already doing.
Thank you, Isabel. Yes, I've learned a lot from both the learned colleagues. There are a few things that I would like to place before the audience. One, Government of Pakistan picks up the remittance cost. It used to be if you remit more than $200 per transaction, the government used to pick up the cost. Since last year, we have reduced the benchmark to $100. If you remit $100 or more, the government of Pakistan is going to pick up the remittance cost. Yes, he is absolutely right. It's not only numbers, but here we are talking of families, their socio-economic development, their integration. So we've worked on a major initiative that is Sehat Insaf Card, and to get them priority inclusion in it. Of course, it's open to all the Pakistanis, but what we've tried is that these migrant workers and their families back home get priority inclusion into it. Yes, we had a lot of videos. I haven't had a holiday in the whole 2020. We have worked even at nights when people were stuck. Our minister was active. We used to run offices during the day, and especially during the holy month of Ramadan. We used to be available on phone all night and getting flights scheduled, getting our people out, getting the permissions, getting them ration. We haven't done anything, I mean, which say it's extraordinary, but we have tried to help our countrymen wherever they were struck. That is why we take pride in the fact that we probably ran the biggest operation when it comes to repatriation in the history of Pakistan. It happened because of this COVID. Dr. Qureshi is absolutely right. Control of sender over remittance. That is why you see this Roshan digital account, and what we're working with them is to have more control as far as how the money is spent. We have studied the model of the Philippines, wherein they've launched a overseas workers bank, and we're working with State Bank towards that side. Having the remittance loyalty program, as well as having control over what they are sending. Another thing was mentioned by, I think from Mr. Qureshi again, the exploitation of workers in host countries. We are working very closely with international organizations as well as with the other countries to have more bilateral agreements and to have standardized labor contracts under those agreements so that chances of exploitation are reduced. We've worked closely with Qatar, with UAE, and now we're working also with Saudi Arabia. And you must have heard that there are major changes to the kafala system in the offing, which are going to be in place in March 2021. We're working closely with them to have the rights of the workers protected, both over there as well as back home. So these are a few points which I wanted to mention. Thank you for giving me time.
Thank you very much, Kashif Saab. We have a few questions from the participants, and one of them is about the SARS program. Any figures, return migrants falling in this program due to some government policies, some of the return migrants or the migrants probably did not benefit from that. Nusab, if you could probably shed some light on that.
Yes, the question is from Mr. Shiraz. Yes. Due to the sort of filter mechanism in place by the BISP program, all the migrant workers are excluded because of three reasons. One, foreign travel. of course, foreign travel is associated with sort of luxury, or you can say that we go on pilgrimage, so you have ample money. That is why they excluded the foreign travel. We have been in talks with them, and we have successfully convinced them that in our case, the migrant worker is traveling to join his job or to come on leave. He's not traveling for leisure or for some pilgrimage. And I'm pleased to say that after pretty long negotiations, they've agreed to it. And they have suggested that we move a one-time exemption for the returning migrant workers so that they can then evaluate those workers on the PSER scorecard that BISP has to see whether the worker satisfies the poverty criteria. That is going to be later. Right now, they were being excluded because of three technicalities: foreign travel, having a smart CNIC or smart NICOP, or having made their passports from executive passport office. So we have managed to convince them that please evaluate them on your scorecard instead of the technicalities. Thank you.
Thank you, Kashif Saab. We have another question from Aisha Ali from ICRC, and that question is for Dr. Sarfraz. She's asking about any findings related to an increase in the irregular migration trend, particularly from the district Gujarat. Dr. Sarfraz.
Thank you, Umar. Actually, the number of irregular migrants is always on the rise. Since the Budapest process report and UNODC's report, they have particularly mentioned about, in the case of Pakistan, about 300,000 to 500,000, you can say Pakistanis, mostly youth, they move abroad through irregular channels. But keeping in view the current scenario, I'm not sure about that those statistics might have been revised, or we might have been, you can say, oriented about the current scenario. But yes, there are, you can say the trends are always on the rise in such regions, because Mandi Bahauddin, Sialkot, Gujranwala, Gujarat, these are the, you can say, triangle districts from where there are certain, you can say, factors which actually influence people to move abroad. The physical, you can say, mobilities, or the social mobilities, or the economic mobilities attained by the families are the dependents of the migrants, those who have chosen either the irregular or the regular channel to move abroad into Europe. When the others look into their mobilities, are the, you can say, the home they have developed, are the bungalows they have developed, are the other access to the resources, are the purchase of cars, or the business they establish. So other people also get motivated out of such, you can say, experiences of the other family. So that's why youth is always aspiring to move abroad. But here it comes the hurdles, because the financial support is required, or the resources they might be required. As mentioned about the movement of the migrant is dependent heavily on the resources they actually have. So those who wanted to move abroad, they need to have some money, because either they are going at their own, either they are being handled by the migrant handlers, or the migrant smugglers, they had to pay them either in the installment or either at full, you can say. But we can see, I have conducted research in the last year in Gujarat and interviewed many of the families of those irregular migrants. They particularly mentioned about the trends among the youth while they are observing to the other, their friends and family members, those who opted to move abroad. So the youth is always aspired to achieve instantly, but sometimes, as Ayaz mentioned, that there are many cases while people moving through Iran to Turkey, they had faced many crises. So many of the individuals who moved through irregular channels, they have been struck by the circumstances, either they were held by the law enforcement agencies. So MRC's role in, you can say, informing certain individuals is very pivotal. They need to establish, I think the center at Islamabad might not be a good, might not be efficient for the regions like Gujranwala, Gujarat, and Mandi Bahauddin. They need to establish a center over there, because discussing such points with Ms. Hina, I already mentioned that we need to have, you can say, centers in such districts where the trends are on the rise. So we need to, you can say, engage those individuals. We need to let them know that these are the hurdles they might face, or those hurdles can be brutal for their life and for their dependents as well. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Sarfraz. We are getting a few questions from the participants. One of them is from Mr. Farooq, and I guess Kashif Musa and Dr. Riaz can both respond to that. The question is that Saudi Arabia is driving Pakistanis out. UAE has also put a lot of restrictions on visas and everything. And so what is the government's response to that? Are we going to leave them on their own? And I'll add my bit to it that, Dr. This adds to the financial crisis that returning migrants or the migrants who have been laid off or are having trouble they face. So if you could share our thoughts on that.
Kashif Musa will respond to that question, but before he does that, I would really like to thank you, Kashif Saab, for explaining some of the issues that I described in my presentation, for explaining them. And I'm really happy that the Bureau of Immigration has those policies in place which see migrants as the proper subject of its activities rather than remittances. So the welfare of migrants is obviously prime in your organization's activities. That's wonderful to see. And also, it's great to know that the government of Pakistan bears the cost on remittances. So I just wanted to make that point very briefly. And I also had the same question about, it's great to know that the kafala system is finally being rolled back. It was one of the most exploitative migrant labor regime in the world. It's nice to see that. So there are positive developments in the Middle East, but at the same time, there are also large scale, there are also fears about Pakistanis being disfavored in relation to other nations in the Gulf countries. I wonder if you would have something to say about that as well. And what we can do diplomatically. Obviously, labor sending countries are not in a position to assert what they want for their citizens, because we are the suppliers of the labor and there is competition in the labor market from other countries as well. But what is it that government of Pakistan can do in collaboration with international agencies to improve the situation?
Thank you, Dr. Sir, and thank you, Farooq sir, for asking this question. Well, if you say that the fear is not there, the fear is there. But if you see that fear being translated into reality, as of now, no. That is why you see diplomatic engagement from the government of Pakistan, from Mr. Bukhari, as well as from our foreign minister, His Excellency Mr. Qureshi. That is how countries respond. You start with diplomatic efforts, then you have a system, proper plan in place. God forbid, if it doesn't work, then what am I going to do? So if it doesn't work, what are we going to do? God forbid. One, you have to get them back and then get them reintegrated. This is only one, I would say, a step of the solution. Two, you have to find them jobs, either home or abroad. Currently, you must have seen that the textile sector is performing above par. More investment coming in, they're looking for workers, they're getting orders. So that is one angle. The CPEC projects have again started rolling. We've shared the data of returnee workers with the CPEC authority. We have shared the data of returnee workers with the new Pakistan Housing Authority, which is building housing projects all over the country, because most of my returnee workers relate to the construction sector. And as far as we are concerned, we are working on diversification. I've submitted my diversification plan to the Prime Minister's office as well as to my ministry, wherein we are going to work on more destinations, including the EU and the Far East. More destinations, and then if we have to retrain, we have to get our workers certified or train them in language as per the requirements of the destination country. We're going to work on that. And we have already started. We had the first webinar for Japan last week. We have actively engaged with the Japanese government, with the Japanese employers, and we are planning to have a series of webinars and to provide facilitation to the employers in those countries to recruit human resource from Pakistan. That is what my job is, to maximize the export of human resource from Pakistan. So it's, you can say, 3 or 4 pronged strategy that we have. As of now, I must for all the audience, we have fears. You get videos, but when you get into the reality, you did mention about some videos, some WhatsApp messages, and I would assure that every video and every WhatsApp message is investigated properly. And in most of the cases, either the gentleman who puts the message has some particular issue, or he is illegal in that country. So if he is being deported, he doesn't want to come back. In one case, he was afraid that if he comes back, his marriage would be broken because he had married some national from some other country, and he put the video on, and somehow it landed into the cell phone of the Prime Minister. So we had to go through the investigation of the whole case, and when we placed the facts before him that he's illegal and he's just afraid to come back, so that his marriage is not broken. So this is what happens to us in most of the cases, but I must assure you that we go through each and every video with full commitment and with full devotion that what is the issue related to that particular gentleman. And in just a few cases with that particular lady. So this is the plan which we have in place. This is what we are trying to do, to have engaged diplomatically, to have them socially reintegrated, as well as to diversify the opportunities. There was another question about the GDP contribution. If you just look at the numbers of last year, $23.1 billion coming in as remittance, with the revised GDP, it's about 6 to 7% of the contribution with the remittances are making to the GDP. Yes, the numbers are important. But more important is people who are sort of contributing towards those numbers. This is exactly what you hear from the Prime Minister all the time. He talks about his overseas Pakistanis. And the direction for all of us is that you have to get back to him and you have to respond to him and then try and do whatever you can within the legal domains. Of course, you have to respect laws of the other country as well as international laws, but you have to try and make life easy. I hope that I've answered your question and the question coming from the honorable participant.
Thank you both, Dr. Ayaz and Kashif Saab, for responding to the questions. Dr. Sarfraz, we have another question for you from Shiraz Hasnat. He's asking that, do you have any data on the illegal migrants who have returned back home or they have been deported back during the COVID-19 time?
Thank you. But I have gone through that question. But unfortunately, in the case of Pakistan, we only depend on the FIA's statistics when it comes to, you can say, the return migrants or the repatriation of the irregular migrants. We don't have such kind of data, district-wise data, but we can have those persons who are coming through flights or the other modes in Pakistan. They are being, you can say, enrolled or they are being enumerated occasionally as supported. But in the case of Gujarat, actually as a researcher, we use social mapping, we use, you can say, the other mode of accessing such individuals like snowball sampling. We go to the families, we go to the communities and we ask them and we had already established relations over there to identify number of individuals. But in research case, we don't go to every individual who is being deported or that individual who went abroad. We go to only the selected individuals. But in the case of data set, I think Nur better explain that do we have such kind of mechanisms in place to, you can say, provide data set for the analysis or other, you can say, needs of the state's policy?
Dr. Unfortunately, my organization doesn't have data when it comes to illegal migrants. We have collaboration with FIA and we get data, we share data online with them. But since it's not my domain, so we don't have the data. Lately, we were tasked by the Special Assistant to Prime Minister that you should request FIA for the deportees data. I've requested, but I don't have the deportees data. But that would only include people who have been deported and declared as deported by the country of destination. And again, that number is not very high because most of the people who come back, because of the privacy laws in the EU especially, unless there is some heinous crime or some, part of imprisonment or term remaining, they normally don't declare that why are they deporting the particular gentleman or lady. Thank you.
Thank you, Dr. Sab and Nur Sab. The question has been addressed. We might get a few more questions from the participants, but while we wait, maybe one question from our side, which is related to Dr. Riaz's presentation, and he mentioned that labor migration cannot be a substitute for sustainable economic development. However, Nusa mentioned about entrepreneurship and maybe skill development so that return migrants can get into something from which they can earn their incomes, and that would probably contribute to economic development. So, Dr. Saab or Nusa, would you like to please share a few more thoughts on this?
Thank you, Zulkarnain. I think that is exactly the point, as you put it, that labor migration obviously is an important source of much needed earning at the national scale, as well as for the families back in villages and communities. I mean, we all know many families which depend entirely on the remittances from outside for running their day-to-day, as well as for sending their children to school or for their food needs or in the need of crisis like health or other life events like weddings, etc. So families, entire families, communities depend on remittances from outside. And remittances also have very positively contributed towards uplifting communities in terms of public works. For instance, hospitals at community level, charitable organizations, philanthropy, schools, madaris, etc. So those are all part of the development at the local level. And in national income, as Kashif Nusa was saying, remittances have a large contribution in the GDP. So at the national scale as well, there's contribution for remittances in national development. So given all that, we do appreciate and acknowledge the role that remittances play in national development and local development. But as policymakers, people should also be aware that they cannot depend on remittances only. The flow of remittances can fluctuate in the face of crises like pandemics, for instance. It can go down if, for instance, policies change in the host countries or destination countries, and they expel migrants in large numbers, as there are fears now. If the policies change, which mean that the labor market becomes even more difficult for are migrants to compete in, and they're unable to send remittances in the same amounts that they were sending earlier, then that lifeline is cut off. So that contribution to economy can suddenly stop, and it's not in your hands to revive it. You can try as best as you can, but then there are laws in other countries and international regulations that you cannot circumvent. So it is not a sustainable source in that sense. It is not something that you can depend on for the development of the country, and you forget about other projects and indigenous kind of development initiative and depend on remittances as a substitute. So yeah, so that's what I was saying, I think, in the presentation as well. There is a kind of tendency in governments across the world, not just in Pakistan, to present remittances as something which will save the day for us. And if we don't get assistance, we get remittances out there, development assistance, for instance. We have got our expatriates outside. We come across that kind of discourse who will save us in our dire consequences, in dire times, who will bring about development in the country. I think that is overstated, the role that expatriates can play. And that also puts a lot of pressure on expatriates themselves. Most of them are living hand to mouth in the destination countries and saving some money to send back home to keep their families running. So putting a lot of pressure on them also, and this false kind of hope on remittances as a substitute to development is, I think, misplaced. So while we acknowledge that a very important contribution that expatriates are making, mostly labor migrants, but we also should understand that this is no substitute to local sustainable development.
Thank you, Dr. Ayaz. So before I conclude the Q&A session, I have one last question for you, Dr. Ayaz, and that is, could the coronavirus contribute to additional discrimination and xenophobia against refugees and migrants?
Yeah, thank you for asking that question. I think we have seen that from the start of the COVID-19 epidemic, that as with other epidemics, and this is not unique to COVID, epidemics are usually blamed at strangers, people who do not belong to a community, who have come from outside, and mostly these are migrants. So this becomes another excuse for expression of xenophobic views and distance from strangers. So we have seen that in the European countries, we have seen that in Middle East, and we have seen that in other places. And mind you, we have seen that in Pakistan as well. So initially the blame was on people coming from Iran, for instance, or people coming from outside. So this is something which in literature we term as foreignization of the epidemic. So this is not us, it's not because of us, it's because of someone else who comes from somewhere else and who brings it to our communities. So that kind of xenophobia has been observed in all kinds of places. And in addition to that, it's not only in the domain of blame or counter-blame, there are also actual facts about prevalence of COVID, which has been seen greater in migrant communities and diasporic communities, especially in the UK, by comparison to the host communities. So there is that reality as well. So COVID has definitely contributed, but since it has become a pandemic now and the epidemic is now locally driven in most places, so we have seen a shift from blaming the migrant to taking it as something which does not differentiate between the migrants or non-migrants, or where it comes from, it can spread within communities. So in most of the places in the world now, the epidemic is community-driven rather than coming from outside. Therefore, those xenophobic sentiments have kind of subsided because of the extent of the epidemic that we are witnessing.
Thank you so much, Dr. Ayaz, Kashif Ahmed Noor Saab, and Dr. Sarfaraz for responding to the question that our participants asked. And also a big thanks to all the participants who have asked the questions. Still, if someone wants to ask any question, they can leave it in the chat box or in the Q&A section. And once we receive them, we will respond back accordingly. Now moving forward towards today's last session, that is on advocacy and awareness raising through the Migrant Resource Centres. And to present this session, I would request Zulkarnain Rafiq to do so. Thank you, everyone. Over to you, Zulkarnain.
Thank you, Umar. If you could share the screen, please. After such wonderful presentations and interesting discussions, I'm not sure the participant as a bit drab, but I'll try my best to share the information about Migrant Resource Centres and their contribution regarding advocacy and awareness raising. As far as the working of the MRCs is concerned, we have two Migrant Resource Centres, MRCs, one in Islamabad and the other in Lahore, and they work under the auspices of the Ministry of Overseas Pakistanis and Human Resource Development, MOPHRD as we call them, and also the Department of Labour Punjab, as far as the Lahore MRC is concerned. Why did we have to come to a point where the MRC, or a resource center for the migrants, was needed, and it became important to fill a gap? It was because it was gravely felt that there's lack of information on safe and legal migration. People are going abroad through different means, but the migration process and the services available to migrants and their families in Pakistan, as well as in the destination countries, is something that they're not aware of. And then there is also a related factor of not knowing what avenues are available to them, what grievance handling mechanisms are available if they get into a problem. Not only in Pakistan, but also in the destination countries. And as I mentioned, that they're both going abroad through legal channels as well as the irregular ways. And the irregular ways have lots of risks and dangers, and the people are not aware of that, and they're putting themselves in harm's way. So that brings us to the establishment of the MRCs, who have the mandate to increase access to information, accurate information on migration and work abroad. And this is for all kinds of migrants who have made the decision, or those who are going through the process of making a decision, the potential, the outgoing, as well as the intending migrants. The MRC's purpose is also to raise awareness on the consequences and risks of irregular migration, in addition to raising awareness on safe migration, as well as human trafficking, migrant smuggling, and the dangers associated with that. MRCs collaborate with the government departments to improve the services available to these intending migrants. And we collaborate very closely with the Bureau of Immigration and Overseas Employment, the Protectorate of Immigrants, and so on. And it is the purpose of the MRCs to become a center which is a one-stop shop, which is a place where every kind of information and support and guidance is available once a person starts his or her journey towards migration to a destination country for the purpose of work abroad or even for education. And it doesn't matter what stage they are in the migration cycle or in that process. So in a nutshell, we've contributed a lot towards these objectives and the mandate that the MRCs had. Over 94,000 local community and youth were oriented on safe and informed migration. Then 80,000, more than 80,000 outgoing migrants are provided pre-departure briefings, as I mentioned, together with the Protectorate of Immigration Rawalpindi. As we grew with age, with experience, and our reputation grew, the OEPs, the Overseas Employment Promoters, they also started requesting us and inviting us to deliver sessions on safe migration to the relevant people, to aspirant migrants. Around 26,000 youth registered with the MRCs when we set up migration awareness stalls, and also as volunteers. And there was keen interest to receive and disseminate, to receive the accurate migration information which was disseminated by the MRCs. We also provide counseling services, and over 18,000 clients have received those services directly through online options that we have. We have a helpline, WhatsApp, and other social media platforms. And we also very effectively made use of SMS, text messages sent to migrants over the period of time, and we've now reached out to over 2.1 million intending and outgoing migrants and their families. So when we are moving ahead for fulfilling our mandate and working to achieve our objectives, we do it in different ways. One of them is to work with the government. We've recently had very good cooperation established with the community welfare attaches who are appointed in different Pakistani missions abroad in destination countries. We oriented them, and that was our contribution towards capacity building and relationship building with the community welfare attaches. A long-term relationship is ongoing with the Protectorate Office in Rawalpindi. We would like to expand that to other Protectorate offices also. But with them, we deliver sessions and inform those migrants who are going abroad. This is the pre-migration orientation sessions. Then we are also in the process of developing joint migration content with them. This can be country specific. This can also be related to general information on about the migration process, visa related information, and so on. As we are speaking here in this webinar, we are partnering with the Overseas Employment Corporation, and we see that as a long-term relationship, and we will be continuing with joint collaboration, events, activities, and all the efforts that we can together make in making life easier for the migrants. And then we also work with migration stakeholders, different kinds of them. We are trying to expand our collaboration, our cooperation with the local organizations, because these organizations have worked with the communities from where the migrants come from. And we by partnering with them, we can reach out directly to the potential migrants. We also try to build the capacities of local partners, whether they are community networks, whether they are volunteer groups, or they are civil society groups. These can include NGOs, as well as the media. We've had some media trainings, and this is in order to advocate the cause of migration, not only normal, regular migration, but also the consequences of irregular migration, also how to respond to the crisis created by the corona pandemic, and then this can be effectively done through the print and electronic media, and that's why we also collaborate with the media partners. We've already had very close collaboration with the academia, with the Tibet institutes, where a lot of orientation, a lot of awareness raising has happened. We've had a lot of MOUs signed and letter of intents signed with the educational institutes, with the academia. And as I mentioned in the case of OEC, we are also hosting this event in partnership with Quaid-i-Azam University. We'll be expanding that network of cooperation to orient skilled workers in youth on migration. And educational consultants and OEPs is another area where we want to build our cooperation for awareness raising and advocacy for the purpose of safe migration. Then we another avenue where we contribute towards awareness raising initiatives is the communities. We try to reach out directly to the communities in the field areas where there's a high incidence of migration. In doing that, we not only do it directly, but also indirectly through partner organizations. We make use of the parent and teacher community networks, as well as groups of activists who are active at the community level, have built a lot of trust with the communities, and it is then a good way of collaborating with them to reach out to potential intending and aspiring migrants.
May I ask you, we are coming close to the end towards of our session, and I believe there's maybe still a couple of questions that might want to be asked. Could you just focus a little bit on fitting with the sessions that we've had today on the COVID interventions, where we try to contribute to increased awareness for returnees, and then quickly come to an end? I think we've gotten a good understanding of the Migrant Resource Centre so far. Thank you.
Sure. I was coming to the next slide, which is digitalizing the Migrant Resource Centre interventions during COVID-19. What happened was, when the corona pandemic spread, we could not continue with the normal routine of activities. So we shifted our focus to virtual platforms and social media interventions. I won't go too much into the details, but we made use of Facebook through posting of information, as well as through live sessions, spreading information through Twitter, and posting videos on YouTube as well. And I can share that we've now reached out to close to 10 million people, and we've had now 62,000 followers. We started from 5,000, which is a testimony to the fact that people are watching these posts, and they are getting this information. They're interested in this information, which is both related to travel restrictions, visa-related information, migration-related information during COVID, how to approach relevant authorities, how to cope with such a situation. And I will share with you a few numbers in relation to that. You know, when we were dealing with these clients and these migrants, before August or maybe during the early part of the year, what happened was that they were asking more about work-related information. They were asking about visa, visit visa information, and that was on top of the agenda. The most questions and the most frequently asked questions were about those areas. But as we moved into the second half of the year, the corona first wave kind of started to go down. Work and travel opportunities started opening up. We saw that the work-related information started to decrease, but what increased manifold was about verification of visas, advertisements for jobs, which was not the case only 3 or 4 months before. We also were asked a lot of questions about MRC services and the information we could provide regarding job-related advertisements that were appearing on social media. And again, it was indicative of the fact that people are responding to the information that is being provided to them through the MRCs. That brings me to the fact that through these different services and through different efforts in trying to achieve the MRC objectives, we've gained trust and credibility over the years. Now, MRCs are seen as a trusted partner, and people ask us questions regarding all different kinds of information, which they were not doing before, and they did not have an avenue, a resource center, which could provide them such information before. So now that we have the trust of the clients, our partners, our stakeholders, what is the way forward for the MRCs? We see a few areas, but we can always add to these. And some of these areas are development and dissemination of information and migration knowledge in partnership with our government stakeholders and the organizations that we're working with. We would like to increase our focus on pre-migration awareness raising and then go down to the grassroots level in the migration-prone areas from where irregular migration is emerging. We can do that by networking with communities or by establishing ground-level teams or migrant facilitation units. We would like to build the capacities of civil society organizations who can then help us in doing this job of capacity building and awareness raising. We would like to become a referral hub and a hub of information and a well-known name when it comes to finding information, guidance, and advice which is related to migration. We already do a lot of referrals and linking up of clients and their grievances to relevant authorities, but we want to expand on that. We would like to link up with TVETs, BOE, and OEC, whether that is for employment-related job search, for upgrading accreditation skills, which can then come in handy in terms of entrepreneurship, income generation activities for returning migrants, especially. Linking them up with the financial institutions, again, especially this would be focused for the migrants who are returning, whether they're returning due to layoffs, due to COVID affected situations, or they are returning voluntarily. But giving them an opportunity to start up their own businesses and opportunities is something which can alleviate their fears, as was mentioned earlier, and to help them support their families. And lastly, some knowledge dissemination on migration through online learning programs and virtual sessions. Pre and post-arrival counseling is something that we are looking at. Very briefly, this was all from my side. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Zulkarnain. If any of the participants have any questions related to the Migrant Resource Centres, they can ask the question in the Q&A and chat box. Now, I think we are running out of time, and I will request Zulkarnain to proceed the event, and let's move on to the final or the last phase of the session.
Thank you very much. So we wanted to also have the Ministry of Foreign Affairs from Germany on board, as they are also co-funding some of the actions that we are running through the Migrant Resource Centre and the cooperation that we are currently undertaking with the Bureau of Immigration and Overseas Employment, as well as the OEC. However, it's shortly before Christmas. Tomorrow is Christmas, so everyone is more or less already on holidays. I would like to thank everyone, all the speakers around the tables today, for your insights. I think it was mentioned a lot of times that it's that we need to strengthen the exchange between academia and on the ground developments, policy development, as well as community engagement. This has also been mentioned recently in talks we've had with journalists who said that they're missing some of the academic background and papers and research that is being done in Pakistan, and they had a feeling as if there was not enough information available on the ground. Whereas then I had to contradict and say, okay, actually on migration, there's been a lot of research, especially in Pakistan, in the past 10 years. We've seen a lot of capacity strengthened within research institutes and universities. So I'm really happy that we were able to present two of you today as with your research, with the work that you're doing in the area of migration. I would also like to thank Mr. Kashif Noor, who has always been a strong supporter and strong counterpart for ICMP, as well as the Migrant Resource Centre. I just want to wrap a few things together that we heard from different interventions. And I felt like a lot of the commonalities between the presentations was on focus on community and community level interventions. So there was both what was mentioned by Mr. Safran Khan on the stigma on the death stigma during the COVID pandemic in community levels, and the families did not even want to show that there was this issue in their families. And we see that a lot of the developments and dynamics take place at community level these days. We've also seen this with the development and migration intervention of Mr. Dr. Quaid, who also mentioned that at community level, remittances are more than just the money that is being sent back, but it's a lot about and also the social welfare and the lifeline that is the connection between migrants and the families at community level. And also DG Noor has been asking the Migrant Resource Centre to focus on community level interventions, because that's where the conversation takes place. that's where people learn from each other, and that's where you have the most impact when you approach people at community level. And so it was also now presented by Sulkanen, the MSc coordinator for Islamabad, who also then showed that we have been asked to do the interventions both at community level. Also, Dr. Safran Khan also mentioned that interventions are needed, centers like the MRCs are needed at local level, and the type of questions that we've been getting and how that has changed throughout the COVID crisis, and how we are slowly getting out of it. Overall, I don't want to take too much of your time. We are close to the end right now. I would just like to see and ask if DJ Noor is still on board, who is also co-organizing this event in one way or another. So happy to hear some closing words as well from your side. And otherwise from ICMP side, I would like to say thank you to everyone who also listened us as well, all the questions as well. It really helps us to get a better understanding also where the interests lie and how we need to move forward. Mr. Noor.
It was a very lively and interactive session. And as always, we gained something out of it. I think there's one question which has been left. It's from Mr. Nasiruddin, talking about the role of OEC collecting monthly or yearly deductions. As I submitted in my presentation, we are already talking, because we have an institution in the country which deals with pensions of the workers, EOBI, Employees Old Age Benefit Institution. So we are working closely with them to cover all the migrant workers, not only those who go through OEC, but any migrant worker who has gone abroad, and later on extend that scheme to all the overseas Pakistanis. So this is for the question asked by Mr. Nasiruddin. Yes, we want to collaborate more, to do more awareness, promote safe and legal migration. It is an inclusive, I would say it's an inclusive thing. It has to be well coordinated. You have to raise awareness. That is the only solution. The migrant worker needs to know the laws of this country as well as of the destination country. How is he supposed to behave? How is he supposed to react? What are his rights? What are his obligations? And the best thing is that if we make him aware, because we can't be everywhere, but if he is aware of his rights, he knows whom to approach, how to take his rights. I think that'll be probably the best day, as far as I'm concerned, of my life, when my worker can go and claim that this is my right and this is the law under which I'm asking for it, and you have to provide it to me. Until that day, we have to work, because Pakistan, and at least for the next 10 years, will be one of the major human resource providers when it comes to the world. Here I would like to differ a little bit with Dr. Qureshi, because I don't have as much employment in the country as ideally we should have. With a declared unemployment rate of about 6%. So it's not only talk about the remittance, it's of gainful employment. And if he works in the country, maybe he might be underemployed. He might not get what he or she deserves. So till that day, when I hope that that day comes soon, when Pakistan can provide for all the workforce that is being added into the economy every year, we have to rely on overseas work. Until that day, we'll be here and we'll keep on working for him. Thank you very much, everybody. Have a very good afternoon, and an advanced Christmas to you and to other colleagues. Hope to see you guys soon.
Thank you very much.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you to the panelists, and thank you for your participation.
Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone.
Bye.
Bye.